That will never work. You can't push that. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's other things you can do. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to stop? Stop. Be happy. Quit while you're Don't bother me. I've seen better. Do you really want to stop? And my third grade, give it up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. Hey listeners, Paul Sading. Welcome to episode 38 of Horrible Writing. We are going to do another in the series of author interviews. This series where I ask folks to come on and share part of their writing journey that not necessarily a lot of folks are talking about out there, but I feel it's very important. From episode 1 of the show, I've talked about empowerment through candor. See, a lot of my writing friends who go by the wayside because of life throwing things at them, and it taking a toll on their creative energy, their creative drive, their creative spirit. And I'm absolutely honored today to have somebody that I read a lot from and have come to read even more from on the nonfiction side in the past year of my life, who has really helped me accelerate my own publishing journey, hitting that target that I have set for myself in 2018. So with that being said, spec writer, science fiction, military sci-fi stuff, and nonfiction writer with a lot of works out there that, again, you've probably heard me talk about on the show before, and I'll continue to talk about because they've been so helpful to me. Chris Fox, welcome to Horrible Writing. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad to have you here. I am absolutely honored and to have you on the show, and I was thrilled when you said that you would be willing to come on and talk about this. Listeners, Chris has a book out there that I read for my own development. It's called 5,000 Words Per Hour. And a really catchy title, right? You're already wondering what this is all about. And it's great. He goes through and he shares tips, tools, and tactics, like we talk about on the show quite often, on how you can improve or increase your proficiency as a writer, whether or not you ever hit 5,000 words per hour, per se. But I was sitting in the gym. I was on the stationary bicycle, and I got to the last chapter of this book about increasing my productivity. And you all know, even as a full-time employee, I'm pretty productive as it is. And I wasn't expecting what was coming. It was a chapter about mindset, about the way Chris had this epiphany, if you will. And that's why I asked him to come on the show today to talk about this, about mindset, why it's so important. So, Chris, I'd kind of like to actually start with that right up front from the beginning. What do you, whether we're talking about 5,000 words per hour or in any speeches or any talks that you give or casual conversations with other creatives, what do you mean about mindset, and why, as a writer, was it so important for you to not only focus on it for yourself, but to share it with your own fan base?
Well, I'm going to get a little brain sciencey on you. So the way the human brain works, we're heuristic learners, meaning that we profile everything around us. So if you walk up to a stove as a child and you see that the burner is hot and you touch it, you're going to associate that orangish color in the burner with heat. You're going to think that's going to be hot every single time. That's how humans really learn. And the reason why heuristic learning is relevant to mindset is if you believe something's possible, then you're right. And if you believe something isn't possible, then you are also right. And for a lot of my life, I kind of pigeonholed myself, and I decided that I had peaked. I wasn't going to be able to go any further. I was in my early 30s. I had squandered my potential. My life had become a bad country song. And so I stopped trying. Because if you have this kind of learned helplessness where you believe that the world can't change around you and you can't make things better, then you're not going to try to put in the tremendous amount of effort necessary to do so, because what's the point? You're just going to fail. So when you start shifting your mindset to one of growth, to one of the idea that things can change and that you can become more than you currently are, then it makes a little more sense to try. And all of a sudden you start getting momentum. In my case, I started going to Toastmasters meetings every Monday night after work, and I would give speeches, and I started winning speech contests and accumulating ribbons all over my wall from various speeches I had given and won the contest. Once I started to see that I could, in fact, start changing my life and turning things around, all of a sudden I was excited about life. And I dropped a ton of weight. I changed careers. I taught myself, self-taught, to become an iOS developer. So at the time, I worked in collections. I really hated the job. My whole job was to call people who were behind on their car payment and say, hey, listen, you got to pay your car payment. Nobody wants to take that phone call, and I didn't want to be the guy making the call. But I realized maybe I could start turning things around. Maybe I could start changing. And I taught myself to be a software developer. I landed a job at a startup. And when that wasn't enough, I decided to kind of pursue my dream of being an author. And all of that harkens back to mindset. And I wish that I had discovered the book of the same name, Mindset, by Dr. Carol Dweck, a lot earlier than I did. Because what I found organically, what I now understand about the way kind of our society works, she spells out in perfect detail and could have saved me years of trouble. And effectively what she says is there are two types of mindset. There's growth and fixed. And most of us, whether we know it or not, have a fixed mindset. We believe that things are basically fixed as they are. So if you have a job, maybe you can get a promotion for $1 an hour, but you're not going to suddenly quit your job and become a full-time 6-figure indie author like I did. You don't believe that's possible. It's by nature the way we kind of think, and everyone around you tends to have this. So like when you're trying to become an author, for example, and you start making these big changes to your life, everyone will tell you, you can't do it, you're going to fail, you shouldn't try, you're just going to be disappointed. And they're doing that because whether they know it or not, they have that fixed mindset. But if you can change to a mindset of growth, the idea that the reason you're not a good writer yet is because you haven't spent enough time writing. And if you keep practicing, you'll get there, as opposed to, that last story that I wrote was really bad, so I must be a terrible writer. You really can turn your life around. So I know that was kind of long-winded and rambly, but that's kind of why I think mindset is as important as it is.
No, it was a great answer. And I'm so glad, and please feel free to be long-winded and rambly with all of them, because there's so much good content in there. From my perspective, I think this is why I love a lot of your work, but why this one really had an effect on me. I usually don't have this kind of effect when I'm in the gym. I had my earbuds in. I was again on that elliptical because my, trying to rehab a bad ACL, listening to heavy metal and reading you. And, it doesn't really pull me like you did in that. And it was something I felt like a personal mission. Other people need to hear this. So please, I love that answer, because I have always been maybe overly skeptical about a lot of things. And especially when it talks about this, and you kind of talk about it in that last chapter. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk to it a little bit here too. When you're overly skeptical, maybe even somewhat cynical, and people start talking, it's easy. Oh yeah, Chris Fox is talking about mindset. Well, he can do that because look where he is. You weren't always where you are now, right? So what was it for you that flipped that switch, if you will? You read you maybe read some self-help stuff that, or philosophical stuff that maybe opened you to it, but I feel, and this is me asserting myself on you, was there something, some catalyst that flipped that switch for you, where you woke up that next day and you went from thinking about mindset, believing that you could see yourself like this, to actually putting that into action?
There was. It was back in 2000 and late 2009, probably, or early 2010, sometime right around then. It was winter, it was dark, it was cold. And this was in Santa Rosa, California. So Northern California, just a little bit north of San Francisco. And I lived with a couple of stoner gamer buddies in a gaming household. It was a demilitarized zone. We had pizza boxes everywhere. I mean, we'd lost the war for the fridge. No one opened that. It smelled too bad. Every stereotype you could think of applied to my lifestyle. I had a dead-end job, and I worked just enough hours to kind of make ends meet. And I didn't want any responsibility at all. It was sort of my Lester Burnham American Beauty job. And I woke up one day and I took a hard look at my life, and I realized I don't like any of this. When I was younger, I was supposed to be this great author. And then when I got older, I got really good at computers. So I was supposed to be an engineer. All these things were supposed to happen. But somewhere along the way, I screwed it all up. And I fell into a really intense depression. I mean, I've suffered from chronic depression my whole life, which we can talk more about if you'd like. But this was a really bad bout of it. And I was forced to look at myself and ask the question, if my life is not going to get any better, if it really is going to be this bad and my body's just going to kind of, slowly decay as I get older and it's going to get worse, what's the point? Why not just end it now? And so I had that kind of get busy living, get busy dying moment where I had to look at my life and say, either I'm going to make this better or I'm going to end it. And I decided to try to make it better. And that was kind of the first milestone moment. The very next day, I enrolled at a couple of courses at the local junior college, both of which I ended up dropping out of. A couple of weeks later, I tried my first Toastmasters meeting, and I started the shotgun approach. I started doing stuff to try to improve myself. And what I learned over the first few months is that it takes time to get good at something. But if you put the time in, it's worth it. And the thing that I actually found that worked well and started to change my mindset was lifting. I was probably 100 pounds heavier than I am now. I was a really, really big guy. I wanted to lose weight. I wanted to get in shape. And so I started going to the gym, and I found that I really enjoyed lifting weights. It was something I could be good at. It's just you, as Henry Rollins says, it's just you and the iron. Mm-hmm. And I started dropping weight. I started getting in slightly better shape, still pretty overweight, but starting to see that change was possible. And if you fast forward, I'm going to say almost 3 years, I've now taught myself to be a software engineer. I can program for the iPhone and the iPad, and I've landed myself a job at a startup. And I ended up flying out to Salt Lake City, Utah. We were meeting with a much larger company, and we sat down across from the executives at this company. And I had been going to Toastmasters for about a year. So the guy that they sent who was supposed to be in charge of this meeting couldn't run it. He just shut down mentally, was not able to do this. And I had to step up and run it. And so here I am, this JC dropout who just a couple of years before was, making collections calls and hating their life. And I'm in this corporate environment where I'm making things happen. And the girl who was seated across from me, her name was Catherine, was absolutely gorgeous. We ended up sitting next to each other at lunch, and I had always believed there's no way that I can meet a beautiful woman. There's no way I can date again. I'm just not that attractive. And here quietly in the background, I've been losing all this weight, and I've been working out, and I've been going to Toastmasters and becoming a more interesting person. And so she started flirting with me, and she started buying me shots when we went out to dinner that night. So I had a wonderful time with this girl. And when I got home to Santa Rosa, I realized, you know what? The reason why I'm not succeeding at dating is the same reason that I didn't succeed at software, and the same reason I didn't succeed at writing, and the same reason I was overweight. I wasn't putting in the effort. And if I do put in the effort, then who knows what I could change about my life. And the very next day I got back and I got to work.
Well, some listeners, if you've listened to the show for a while now, I've talked about my military career, and that one of the jobs that I had while I was in the military was in the mental health clinic. So I'm all about behavior modification. Chris, for you, one of the things that I'm sure helped continue that positive change was what you just talked about, recognizing those positive changes as they were occurring. But that was a result of your efforts. For you, in an effort to help somebody listening to this right now who may have heard what you just said and feel like, wow, that's just a bridge too far for me. I couldn't do all of what Chris just talked about. Did you find any tips that helped you at the onset, at the very beginning? So if we reverse that timeline back to where you made that decision, I'm going to go do because I'm out of excuses, and this is where I'm at this point in my life. So those reservations that you may have had, if you had them, correct me please if you did not, but about going to the gym, doing the Toastmasters thing, a lot of people stop themselves from doing it because of that, that negative self-talk. Do you have anything that you could share with somebody like that from your own experience? Maybe that when you did hear that negative self-talk, like, I'm overweight, I'm never going to lose it, I can't do a Toastmasters. How did you shut that voice down? How did you go do?
It's kind of an all or nothing thing. I think that you've got to reach a point where the pain is so bad that you'll do anything to get out of it. We're animals ultimately, and we'll do whatever it takes to escape pain, just like any animal would. And when you really hate yourself, when you really believe that you're worthless and you failed in every way, that you should as a person, and you look at your life and you don't like who you are and you don't like where you are and you don't see a clear path to get away from it, things get real focused. And you have to make some hard choices. And what I said to myself is, I'm going to celebrate any tiny little milestone that I get. I'm going to try to change myself. I'm going to see what's possible. And there were doubts in my mind. Like I asked myself, is this going to be something I can really do? And I think it wasn't until the first Toastmasters meeting where I gave a speech and I was terrified. And at the end, everybody clapped and then they vote on the best speech for the night. And I won a ribbon. They liked my speech better than the other two speeches. And all of a sudden, for the first time, and I was maybe 34 at this point, for the first time since my early 20s, I'd won something. Like outside of a video game, I had won something in real life and people were recognizing me. And here was this nice shiny blue ribbon, which is on my wall right now behind me. And I was excited that that had occurred. And that showed me, that little signpost, that change was possible. So I think it's choosing to look for the very small victories and understanding that you're not trapped where you are. I would try to get the right information. Like that book I mentioned, Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. It's a great audiobook too. Get it and listen to it. It really will change the way you look at things. And you'll start thinking, yeah, I can do whatever I want as long as I put in the work.
And I love that you keep saying that, and that you said that, listeners, I've said this before, and Chris, I thought it was funny because in your in that chapter in 5,000 words per hour, you did mention, I can't remember exactly verbatim how you did it, but it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing in here about, hey, I'm not all warm and fuzzy about this mind stuff either, but you gave it an opportunity. And for listeners, Michael Shermer has a book called The Believing Brain, where he talks a lot about that. And Chris, I think this is why your last chapter really motivated me to reach out to you. When you talked about the daily struggle that you had with suicide, I related to that, and I wanted to follow that up, because had I not read Shermer's book about the believing brain, and we start believing what we choose to see, and that's how it just is vicious cycle that feeds itself. Your last chapter was an excellent supplement to what I took away from his book, because I started seeing that. And since I read your 5,000 words per hour last week, I've been doing daily imagery exercises, for lack of a better term, for that, because I think you really spell it out there. Before we get to maybe employing a tool like that, you talked about toxicity, and I thought it was really powerful. And it's something I personally see, and I imagine you do as well, so please feel free to talk to it. People in your circles, writer circles, professional circles, personal circles, who are so mired in their situation that they don't see a way out. And then when they do, those few people who, peek up above the hole and they can see the promised land, they get sucked back in because of the toxicity surrounding them. Can you talk about your own situation, that toxic situation, the impact that it had on you, and how you were able to not only pull yourself out of it, but the benefits that you've realized since doing that?
Yeah, we all have kind of our own social paradigms, our friends and family around us, and we're all kind of collectively a product of our environment that we create. So when you see what your cousin is able to do and what kind of job he got, and you see what your dad does and your mom, and they see what you do for a living, we all sort of form our expectations based around what we've witnessed. And when you come up and you say something like, I'm going to write a novel, and I'm going to write a novel that's going to be so good that it's going to sell, and I'm actually going to make a living being a writer. If somebody loves you, like let's say your mom, she doesn't want to see you get hurt. She's going to do whatever it takes to prevent you from being in pain. And in her limited growth mindset, she's very fixed. She doesn't think you're going to be able to do this. She thinks you're going to try to write this book, it's going to fail, and you're going to be crushed. And so she's going to do whatever it takes to dissuade you. So even though it's coming from a loving place, this person in your life is trying to sabotage what you're doing. And you have to get to a point where you are able to remove that kind of feedback and that toxicity from your life if you ever want to achieve anything. They say that we're the product of our 4 closest friends. Well, you get to choose who your 4 closest friends are. So like you could set up a mastermind with 4 authors who are all more successful than you and see what they do on a day-to-day basis and start trying to emulate them. Or you can do as I did for many years, the 4 stoner friends on the couch who aren't accomplishing anything for their life. And sure, maybe you feel a little bit better at times because, maybe you're ahead of them at a job, you make a couple more bucks an hour. But you're not, none of you are setting the bar very high. And so it's not until you remove yourself from that environment and start surrounding yourself with people who want similar goals that you're going to achieve the big things that I think all of us want to achieve.
in trying to help people identify that toxicity from a writer's perspective, what types of things did you hear? You are somebody that we can point at. You're a vector and say, I want to be like Chris Fox. So that wasn't a pain-free journey for you. What were these people saying? And I ask you that question to help other people maybe identify. They might not even be identifying. So maybe identifying those toxic comments, toxic sentiments that people are, pulling back writers who aspire to do this great thing like you were able to do for yourself, and just throwing barriers in their way day in and day out. What was it that people were saying?
Well, the number one thing is that your writing sucks. Your writing sucks and the story is not interesting. And it's especially bad when they're right. Because writing is like anything else. It takes time to learn. There's all these, complex skills that you have to learn to weave together to tell a great story. And at the beginning, we don't know how to do that. So your writing sucks in the beginning. And of course, what do? You show it to the people who will actually read it. And that's going to be the people that love you. So you could probably get your wife to read it. You could probably get, maybe your mom or some friends to read it, but it's going to be bad. And they're not going to want to hurt your feelings, but a lot of them will. They'll be honest. They're like, this is terrible. And they're going to try and derail you, where in their mind, you just handed them this terrible short story, and it is terrible, and they believe it's terrible. So they think that you're a terrible writer. They don't stop to think, well, maybe this is the earliest story he's ever written, and he's going to get a lot better if he keeps practicing. Mm-hmm. And so instead of giving you the encouragement that you actually need to hear that's going to keep you moving, they tell you you're terrible, and you stop. I mean, go back to like the 5-year-old version of you. If you ran up to your mom with a finger painting and it looked terrible, your mom would tell you this is amazing, and she put it on the fridge because that's going to keep you painting. It may not actually be amazing, but if somebody gives you critical feedback like, oh my God, you're not coloring the lines, what the hell is wrong with you, kid? You're going to start bawling and you're never going to write again. So your mindset is a very fragile thing, and you've got to keep it positive. And if there are things that are negative that are damaging it, and in my case, one of them was my best friend. He was quick to poo-poo everything that I tried to do. I still remember, and it stings. He said to me, Chris, you're just another geek. You're not going to be able to accomplish these things. You're just another geek, because I had such big dreams. And I'm happy to say that, he's long since recanted that and said he was wrong. And it is super supportive for me today. But at the time, for a while, I had to cut this guy out of my life, even though we had been best friends, because I knew that it would damage my mindset. If you're already struggling to accomplish the things that we do, which requires so much work, and it is so hard and so lonely a lot of the time, you need positive feedback. You need to watch, motivational videos. You need to find people who believe anything can be done. You can't be surrounded by the naysayers, really.
And I think you just provided maybe one of the more powerful tips, tools, and tactics that we can do for ourselves right there when you said that you had to cut them out of your life. And I know you mentioned that in the book as well, that, and you encourage people to do that as well. What would you say to that person that's looking you right in the eyes, though, and saying, Chris, these people are important to me. I can't cut them out, even when we all know that person or those people are the very thing that's, hindering the progress of that writer.
I tell them, and I get this question in person a lot, I tell them, quite frankly, make a hard choice. If they're really that damaging, do you want to be a writer? Because either you cut that person out of your life, or at the very least, you stop telling that person about your writing. You never talk with them about it again. You never mention it. You never bring it up. That is a totally private part of your life, and you don't discuss it with that person because they'll be negative about it. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is the people who are negative in the beginning will stay negative for a while. So when I started making money and started being successful, then they'll start saying things about you keeping it. And eventually they'll shift the argument to the quality of your writing. So even though I'm making really good money, my books aren't that good. So you're going to have to deal with haters no matter what you do. And again, the smartest thing you can do is just cut them out of your life ruthlessly as best as you are able to do. And if you can't cut them out entirely, cut out your interactions around your passion.
It's great hearing you say these things, because just thinking about your line of your product line, if you will, not to sound too businessy, but you sort of model that in your books too. You don't hold back from positioning yourself with that spirit, having heard you say that, with 5,000 words per hour, a 6-figure author. Those, I imagine, for you have garnered a lot of skeptical comments and toxic comments. I can only imagine in the age of the internet what the type of reaction you've gotten from those things. So it tells me, if I'm correct, it tells me that you've really armed yourself, if you will, to kind of shield, if that's the right way of saying it, shield yourself from that kind of toxicity, even from external, non-intimate people, parties?
It's hard because, like, for me, reading reviews tells me what I'm doing wrong as a writer. If you leave me a 1 star and you can tell me why you didn't like my book, then maybe I get to be a better writer because I realize, oh, that you're right, that was a mistake, and I fix it. But at the same time, it also opens you up, and we're all still kind of fragile. We all still want to, read 5 stars and hear that people like our work, and it can derail your entire day if you read a 1 star review about your books. So even though there is a lot you can learn from them, if you know that you're in a fragile emotional place, and that's totally okay, we all get there. I've had many days like that recently. Then it's good to shield yourself from that. I don't go check my reviews. I don't look at any of that stuff because I know that there's a risk that I'll see something that's going to knock me out of a good state and make it harder for me to write. I'm going to start, questioning my ability to do this writing thing. We're ultimately artists, and positive energy. I mean, it sounds so woo-woo and so non-sciencey. But when you start looking at neuroscience, you realize that it really does work. The reticular activating system, this is something that I first heard about from Tony Robbins and then did a lot of research on. It's the part of your brain that recognizes things. And so what you do is you decide what's important in your life, and then your brain is going to tell you through this reticular activating system when something that's relevant crops up. So for example, if I were to say to you right now, look for the color red in your immediate surroundings, and you were to glance around, you would immediately be drawn to all the red objects. Whereas before, before I said the word red, red was not important to you for any reason, and so your brain wasn't noticing it, even though the colors were there. And that really applies to everything around you. So if you're an extremely negative, cynical person, then you're going to find that the universe around you supports that because your brain's looking for it. You are trying to find negative things, and you're automatically glossing over the positive. And the flip side is also true. If you are a very positive person and you're always looking for positive things around you, then you're going to find them. Even though the negative stuff is there too, you're not going to dwell on it. You're not going to focus on it. You're going to preserve that precious state of mind that is so important to doing what we do.
And that's a great jumping point for what I wanted to ask you about. In the book, you provided a great tip, tool, tactic about starting that mindset change. And you talked about raising your standards. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that, conceptually, what does that mean? And how does one apply it to their real life? If they are that person that you talked about that had to make that hard decision between cutting out a toxic person and focusing on writing, or giving up writing to keep that toxic person. So we've taken that person, and now you're telling them to change that mindset, raise your standards. What does that mean conceptually? How do they apply that in real life?
So in real life, your environment is a product of your standards. If you walk in the bathroom and your garbage is completely full, it's completely full because it's not important enough to you to take that out. It isn't. You may look at it and be like, you know what? Yeah, I probably should take out my garbage, but you don't care enough to actually do it. If it was a standard, then that garbage would always be empty. You would take it out. You wouldn't even think about it. For me, going to the gym is a standard. I wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and I just go to the gym. I don't think about it. It just happens. I get out of bed, I put my shoes on, and I go. And initially, this sort of discipline is very, very difficult to build. It's hard to get yourself to go. And so it does take willpower. There's no way around it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. There's no shortcuts. You have to want it really bad. You have to say, what I'm going to get for putting in this discipline is going to be worth the pain of what I'm having to do. I want to be like a famous athlete or a famous actor or a famous author or whatever it is you want to do. The work necessary to that is going to be hard and long. And the image of who you're going to become is going to have to sustain you. But once you've put that work in for a little bit, once you've raised your standards and you say to yourself, I am a power lifter, I do lift weights, I am strong, that is who I am, then you just naturally start to do it. And it's no longer any effort. I don't have to think about going to the gym. It just happens now.
I'm curious because your comment right there just made me think about it. Just this question popped in the front of my brain, maybe because I've had a number of conversations this week about it with other writers. Were you, at any point in your writing journey, were you ever susceptible or a victim of the imposter syndrome?
I still am today. I got a 1-star review on my latest release, Fellowship. And basically, the guy said that it needed more proofreading. And this book, it's interesting. I took an additional 9 weeks to do this book, which is way longer than I'd normally put into a book. I have extra levels of people going through this proofing. I had more beta readers. My process was more intricate than it's ever been. And here's this reader telling me 1 star that this book sucks. And your immediate reaction, I find, is always the same thing. I'm a terrible writer. I'm a terrible
Wow.
writer. I see a 1-star review, and you can logically start saying to yourself a minute later, okay, obviously that's not true. And the rational side of your mind will kick in. But the scared little 5-year-old that is waiting for praise from mom is alive and well in all of us.
Interesting. That is, yeah, no, that's interesting. So where did you, what types of sources of energy did you draw off of to maintain that motivation for, I mean, this was a major behavior change that you underwent, behaviorally and cognitively, your mindset that had to require, I would assume, regular injections of something, some kind of reward mechanism, if you will, that helped you keep plugging along through that. This wasn't a short road for you. So what types of things would you maybe even encourage folks to go look at in their own world that helped you keep going on those tough days?
I would set achievable milestones. So things you can do. Because if you start out with, I'm going to write a novel, and you've never written a novel and you've never finished a story, that's a massive, massive undertaking. I'm going to write a short story, or I'm going to read this book that's going to teach me how to write a novel. And instead, those are goals or milestones that you're doing on your way to doing or becoming an author that can write a novel, a novelist. That's a lot more achievable and a lot more doable, and it's going to keep you moving, and you're going to start to get momentum. Every time I went to Toastmasters and I won another speech contest, I would get that renewed drive. I'd get this little ribbon in my hand that, hey, I've done something. And I didn't have that when I was teaching myself how to program for the iPad. Instead, all I got was a lot of frustration as I tried to overcome certain problems. And so what I had to do was gamify it. I started marking on the calendar. It was the whole break the chain thing. I'm not even sure who's responsible for creating it at this point, but every day that I programmed at a certain time, I get to put a little X on the calendar. Mm-hmm. And I stuck with that because I knew that it was going to be a matter of time until I knew enough that I could actually get a job doing this. And I didn't have any immediate milestones. There was no like, oh, I'm going to finish this little program or app that I'm working on, and that's going to make me feel great, because I was teaching myself the basics. So if you can find a way to make some milestones to gamify what you're doing so that you can see steady improvement, it's going to keep you fired up and able to keep moving forward. Whereas if you're just trying to go towards that nebulous goal and you don't have a plan to get there, it gets really easy to get discouraged and just give up.
And I think that ties back in, because I did want us to hit on, because you did open the door that I could talk to you about this, the aspect or the reality of dealing with chronic depression. We creatives, I mean, we can be very sensitive to a lot of things, and we really put it out there in our stories. Every character is a little part of us, and we have to be vulnerable. How does all of this mindset stuff relate to that reality as a published author, but also as a human being who's dealing with chronic depression?
The depression never really goes away. I put out a video recently, I want to say in December or maybe January, called The Stuff They Don't Tell You About Being an Author. And it focuses on depression. And I talked about how in November and December, I really, really wrestled with it. I had to take some time off. I stopped writing for a little bit because it is something that I wrestle with, especially in the winter. Seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, that lack of vitamin D. And I really have fought with depression my entire life. And no matter what I've achieved, it never lasts for long. It never makes the depression go away. The only thing that allows me to manage that depression is forcing myself to adhere to my routines. I need to go to the gym. I need to work out, because if I don't do that, I will start, falling into that depression and kind of wallowing into it. And it's something that people who don't suffer from depression may not understand. They assume that it's sad. It really isn't. It's more like apathy. It's like all the color has been leached out of the world, and you can't think of a reason to care about anything or to do anything. You're just going to kind of lay there and do nothing. And it's like the total opposite of what you need to be able to do to accomplish anything. You have this apathy that's just sort of gnawing at your life. And so what I said to myself, I got angry. I wanted to be able to accomplish stuff, and I was tired of being a prisoner of this depression. And so I would set myself these aggressive goals. And if I started to feel depressed, I'd try to go pursue it. That's where I really started falling in love with the gym. I would try to throw some more weight on, and bench maybe another 20 pounds and, keep trying to change my body and exert some sort of control over something. And it works to a limited extent, but I still wrestle with it today. Success does not do anything to combat depression.
But I think that's an important thing to mention to folks. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on, because you were just so candid, so raw, and so open with it. I just knew that it would really be able to help other folks. And especially when we're dealing with or talking about something like depression, I really do appreciate you sharing that aspect of it. I've got a quote for you, one of yours. And I'm wondering if you might be able to share an example from your own journey. You said, when you tell your brain that you want to become a best-selling author, anything that will make that a reality suddenly becomes significant. You'll notice opportunities and tools that you never would have seen before. So in your own journey, as you were developing this mindset, helping maybe with an eye to those newer writers, what types of things what specific examples did you envision to position for them to become significant, to keep you charging ahead and working towards those?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how I kept the motivation high, and I didn't go to any specific images beyond the fact that I wanted to sell a lot of books. Where I really struggled wasn't with becoming an author, because by the time I did that, I had gone from working in collections to being a software engineer. So my kind of uphill climb was convincing myself that I would be good enough at software that I could hold down a job next to people who had gone to Berkeley and Stanford. And this ties very closely to my sense of self-worth. I didn't graduate from college. I've always been intimidated by the academic world, by people who've managed to stick with it and finish their degrees. So for me, there was always this vision that I was going to be able to do real science next to people who had their degrees from places like this. Like, I could still matter. I could still achieve my dream. And I thought about that a lot, and thinking about that in idle moments on the bus and, walking around town really kind of kept me interested, because I looked at my life. I wasn't happy. There's a lot of pain surrounding my current situation. And here I had this dream of something that would be better. And I just kept pushing until I got there. So I guess if you're a new writer today, what should really help you is the idea that I have seen over the past 12 months, brand new authors knock it out of the park with their very first book and are now making six figures and making a living at this. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen for you, but it could. You could write your book. It could take off. You could become a fairly wealthy author. And whatever your job is, whatever your situation is right now, you could turn it all around tomorrow. You could become, everything it is that you want to be. And just the idea that that's possible, I think somehow helps keep moving forward. You're still going to have your problems. It doesn't make your problems go away, but at least you know that there's still the possibility that you're working towards something and you can have much more than you have today.
What role, in Chris's opinion here, what role does personal accountability play into all of this?
I think it's critical. The primary issue I see with almost everybody that I deal with, and I get tons of email every day from writers, is they want to go watch a video on YouTube or they want to read a book about being a writer, but they don't actually want to write. They don't want to sit down and practice and craft these stories and do the hard work and put the writing in front of people who are going to tell them your writing sucks. And it does when we start. It does. You have to go through why it sucks and how it can be better. And you got to do that a lot. And so this forcing you to improve, it's hard. And none of us likes to do that. So it's really, really easy to get into a situation where you're learning something instead of doing it. And if you want yourself through it and actually do the work.
That's great. I had to ask you that because I don't remember where in the book it was. It could have been the beginning. It could have been the end. I want to believe it was towards the beginning, but you even mentioned that most of the readers who bought this book they'll never write their own book. They'll quit. They may not even finish reading 5,000 words. They'll just stop writing. So it is. I had to ask you that because matter of fact, tonight I'm heading over to my Olympia Writers Group. And I love them dearly. They help me so much. But there are a lot of talented people, going back to what you've said about, trying to anchor on those visions for your goals that help you, stay focused on that. Imposter syndrome, all of those things that we deal with. And I go there and I see some of these incredibly gifted writers. And I know for a fact, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, that, they'll never actually publish anything because they've got every reason in the world why they won't stop editing chapter 1 of that damn book that they're working on.
All those reasons come back to a single reason, I think, and that's that it really, really hurts to be told that you're not good at something. And in the case of something like writing, this goes back to that Carol Dweck fixed mindset. We unconsciously believe that we can't change. So either you are a good writer or you aren't a good writer. Not you can become a good writer. You are or aren't. It's a binary condition. And so if you get a story back from somebody and they say it's terrible, that doesn't mean your story's terrible. It means you're terrible.
Right.
And so they don't want to feel that pain. And it's way easier to think about being a writer than it is to embrace that pain and deal with it constantly.
Listeners, I'm going to link that book in the show notes. So go over to your podcatcher, your smartphone, wherever you're listening to this, and make sure you look for that link if you are interested in it. So I want to make sure that I put it out there. So Chris, something that I do with every guest, and you've been kind enough, I've got your permission to do this to you as well. Listeners, if you're a first-time listener, the show is called Horrible Writing. And it's a little bit of a playful, deprecating term for myself, kind of like what Chris has been talking about here. My writing is still horrible. I'm passionate about this, and I'm driven. I'm going to get published. And I don't care how horrible it is, I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep plugging on. And I do that because I think sometimes a lot of what, like Chris has been saying, we use that as a crutch, and we rationalize away actually pursuing this gift to the world of giving the world our stories, and something that may also be a dream for us. So I ask writers to come on Horrible Writing. I ask authors to come on Horrible Writing and share one of their horrible writing experiences. If you're a new listener, you might not know what the theme of it is. So I asked them to share something horrible, funny, embarrassing, ultimately something they overcame and continued sharing their gift with the world in a way that we can see that regardless, one, we're not alone. We've all done something embarrassing or had something horrible happen to us as writers. But two, that if we stay focused, driven, motivated, and we keep working, that we can actually get there. So Chris, with that in mind, and with everybody on board now, what is your horrible writing experience?
The thing that leaps to mind very quickly, it happened during my 21-day novel challenge. So here I am, picture this. I've just quit my day job as a software engineer. It's February of 2016. I've just put out a book called Write to Market, and I'm going to be a full-time author. And people start getting Write to Market, and the question that's cropping up all over the internet is, who is this Chris Fox guy that thinks he can tell us how to write? He's never written a book and had it really take off and blow up the world by writing to market. So he hasn't proved that he can do what it is he says he can do. So I set up a 21-day novel challenge. This is how I launched my YouTube channel. And every day I recorded a video of me writing, and I showed what I was doing. And people got to see this novel, Destroyer, coming together, and watched as I plotted and wrote it. And I wrote and edited this book in 3 weeks. So it was done super, super fast. I had already done that with several novels before, so I knew it was possible for me. And I had a pretty good editing process, so I was pretty happy with it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to show these guys. So I finished this book, Destroyer. I get it put out there. I'm very, very proud of it. And I think it's going to do well. And much to my surprise and delight, it does. It breaks the Amazon top 1,000. It keeps going. It gets down to like number 200 in the store. I mean, I'm making crazy amounts of money every day. I'm super excited. And then the emails start rolling in.
Uh-oh.
It turns out that the epilogue of this book, I used the wrong instance of the character's name. So it's supposed to be our main protagonist, and instead, every time where you're supposed to say Nolan, it says Stryker. It's the wrong name, and everybody knows it. And so they're not seeing it until they get to the end of the epilogue, but it's starting to show up in reviews, and I got probably 150 emails that day. And I was just so mortified because I claimed that I was going to be able to do this, and all the eyes of the world are watching, and I had like one of the most enormous amounts of egg on my face I've ever had. But I very quickly uploaded a new manuscript. I fixed the problem. I contacted Amazon, and they eventually fixed the issue for me. So a week later, this whole problem had gone away, and all the embarrassment that I felt and all the egg on my face was sort of gone. And today people still somewhat remember, but it didn't affect the success of that book at all. It's gone on to sell a whole bunch of copies, and so have the sequels. But at the time, I mean, it was terrifying and embarrassing. And here, I screwed up in one of the worst ways you can screw up, and I will always have to live with that.
Well, and in the context of it too, that you did it in this challenge, and with all this doubt out there already, or skepticism maybe about you being able to do it. So yeah, in that full context, to do something, and it wasn't something like a complex plot line. It was a protagonist. But that, and listeners, that's why that's exactly why I asked guests on the show to share that. A lot of us would be mortified. Some of us might, scrap Scrivener or Microsoft Word, our laptops, and never write again because of something like that. But Chris didn't. Chris, obviously, you go out to Amazon today and just go type his name in the search box. You'll see how how productive he is. I mean, there's just a ton of content out there. So Chris, I really do thank you for sharing that, because it's a cute story, and it's awesome to see that, ultimately, a ripple in the ocean is all it ended up being. And probably a funny story for you too, I imagine.
Yeah, we're far more critical of our mistakes than other people are. We remember them far longer than other people do. No one's thinking about that time in 7th grade where you tripped when you were trying to dance. That's only you.
So true. Okay, so Chris, you have helped folks so much today. I mean, for me, you've helped me with your book. I don't know if you deliberately did that or not, but while I have you here on camera, I do want to thank you for that, because it is you have. I'm already incredibly motivated. People who know that and know what I do already question how I do as much as I do. But to have somebody like you share that candidly and that openly about some of the things that a lot of authors will stay away from, it makes a difference. And that's what I feel my niche with this show is all about, is, empowering other writers. And you've done that today. So I want to thank you for that. But before we say goodbye, I want to give you a chance to talk about some of the stuff that you have out there, or maybe that you have coming down the pipe that we can expect from you.
Sure. I'm working primarily on the Magic Deck Chronicles, which is a fusion of epic fantasy and science fiction. So you've got dragons fighting starships and mages and dead gods in space. So that's the fiction that I'm working on. For nonfiction, I just finished up the latest draft of Plot Gardening today, which is my first attempt at a real craft book. We're getting into the fundamentals of story structure, and I'll have that out probably next month. And that's been a lot of fun to do, a lot of fun to work on a craft book and to distill everything I've learned over the last few years into a short, easily digestible book. Because the big problem I run into with most crafts books is they're dense. I love John Truby's Anatomy of Story, but it's like a phone book. And it took me probably 6 months to get through that book. I want to write something that people can finish in an afternoon, and that will actually make a very immediate, visible difference to their writing. So that'll be out pretty soon.
I'm looking forward to that, because, some listeners, some of you will know this, I've mentioned it before, but, for a living, I teach government employees about leadership, and micro-learning is a very, very popular thing because it's very effective. So when you're writing, just like what you said there, if you can break it down into something easily consumable, people are going to be able to think through it and apply it much quicker than, trying to dig through some tome. So that,
fingers crossed. Let's hope they like it.
Yeah. Well, you've got the road where you've already got yourself proven out there. And listeners, I do want to mention that. I know that I've bragged on my accounts and in my circles about how good it feels to do word count. People always ask how in the world I have 4 novels all in editing, getting ready to be published, while also writing and producing 4 audio dramas. And I still, even with that track record, I've looked at Chris's 5,000 words per hour, his 6-figure author, his launch to market. On the nonfiction side, for new writers, those things are easily consumable. And Chris, there's just so many good tips, tools, and tactics in there. They're really great. And that's not even including all of your fiction work. How many books do you have published now?
21.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. That's awesome. So now that folks who may not have heard of you before now know who you are, and you spent an hour helping them think about mindset and how to actually pull out of things like a toxic environment. I mean, these wonderful life lessons. How can people find you?
Most of my work is available at chrisfoxwrites.com. You can also Google Chris Fox, and I should be the first thing that comes up. And I've got articles for writers. I have a YouTube channel for writers and a bunch of free resources at my site. So if you are a writer and you're just looking for how to do this, you can get a free copy of 5,000 words per hour. That's my first book, and or a bunch of other free information. So take a look at all that stuff and learn what you can before you pay anybody anything.
All right, Chris, I want to thank you one more time for coming on. This has been an absolute honor and joy. You've given a lot to folks today, and I really do appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sading, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse at Writing Horrible and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.